On a warm August night in 1969, the Mississippi coast meets a force that the science of its own era cannot measure. Along the quiet shoreline of Pass Christian, whole neighborhoods stand one evening and simply vanish before the dawn. Homes here are not merely flooded or broken. They are erased, lifted clean from foundations that held for generations. The very instruments built to record such a storm fail, because nothing in living memory has prepared anyone for it. This is the night a single hurricane rewrites what humanity believes a storm is capable of doing to the world. What the official record still struggles to explain is how one storm grows so violent, so impossibly fast, at sea. How does a faint ripple of wind drifting off the coast of Africa become the strongest hurricane ever to reach America? And why do the deadliest hours of this disaster unfold, not along the coast at all, but far inland, deep in the night? There is a second tragedy hidden inside the first, one that will claim even more lives than the storm's terrible surge. To understand the true nightmare of Camille, we must follow it from a calm summer ocean to a permanently changed nation. Before the storm arrives, the Mississippi Gulf Coast is a string of small towns where the sea is a neighbor, not a foe. Fishing boats work the warm waters, and grand old homes line the beachfront roads beneath ancient, spreading live oaks. Families gather on porches in the thick August heat, and the rhythm of coastal life moves slowly, certain of itself. For most who live here, hurricanes are a familiar season, a recurring visitor that arrives, passes, and is endured. The coast has weathered storms for centuries, and that long memory breeds a confidence that edges toward complacency. In late summer, the warm Gulf is at its hottest, and the season of greatest hurricane danger reaches its yearly peak. The towns of the coast bear gentle names and long histories, places built for leisure as much as for working the sea. Hurricane season is a familiar rhythm here, and most years the coast is brushed but spared, the very worst nature offers. Few residents imagine that the same warm water drawing visitors to the shore can also forge a storm of unequaled power. The coast knows wind and rain and high water, but it cannot yet picture or truly believe in a storm of this magnitude. In 1969, weather forecasting is still a young science, learning in real time the secrets of the storms it must track. There is no Doppler radar to peer inside a hurricane, no dense satellite network watching every cloud as it forms. Forecasters rely on pressure readings, scattered ship reports, and the courage of pilots who fly into the unknown. A hurricane warning in this era is a blunt instrument, telling little of whether a storm is ordinary or truly monstrous. The public has no simple scale to grasp a storm's strength, no single number that tells a family when it must flee. Every prediction carries deep uncertainty, and the people on the coast weigh those warnings against their own memory. Weather satellites do exist by 1969, but their images are coarse, offering only a distant and blurred view of any storm. The most reliable data still comes from hurricane hunter aircraft, flying into the eye itself to gather their readings. These flights are perilous, and their crews are among the very few who truly sense how violent Camille is becoming. Each reconnaissance flight returns with figures more alarming than the last, painting a picture of relentless growth. The benchmark for catastrophe is Hurricane Betsy, which struck the Gulf only 4 years earlier in the autumn of 1965. Betsy is the measuring stick, the worst that an entire generation along this coast can imagine a hurricane becoming. So when warnings arrive in August 1969, many residents quietly compare the threat to a storm they have already survived. That comparison, drawn from memory and hard experience, will prove one of the most dangerous assumptions of the era. Because the storm now gathering in the Atlantic does not resemble Betsy or anything the Gulf Coast has witnessed before. It begins humbly, as a tropical wave sliding off the African coast in early August, one disturbance among many that season. For days it drifts west across the open Atlantic, barely noticed an unremarkable cluster of clouds and rising air. At first, it shows no menace at all, just a swirl of weather lost in the vastness of a warm and crowded ocean season. Ships at sea note the disturbance, and forecasters mark it on their charts, one of many systems to watch that summer. For nearly 2 weeks the wave travels, drawing little attention as it crosses thousands of kilometers of open water. Then, near the warm waters of the Caribbean, the system finally finds its shape and tightens into a circulating storm. The Atlantic in late summer is a nursery for storms, where warm water and moist air conspire to birth them by the dozen. Most such waves never amount to much, fading quietly back into the ocean haze from which they first emerged. But conditions this year are unusually favorable, and the wave that will become Camille survives where others perish. Forecasters give the new storm a name, Camille, never suspecting what that single word will soon come to represent. The storm brushes the western edge of Cuba, drawing strength, and then slips into the open Gulf of Mexico beyond. Crossing the island, it weakens briefly over land, and some quietly hope that Cuba has blunted its dangerous momentum. But land cannot hold a hurricane for long, and back over warm water, Camille resumes its sinister gathering of force. Here, in these tropical Gulf waters, Camille meets the conditions that will turn it from merely dangerous into historic. Beneath the surface lies the Loop Current, a river of deep, exceptionally warm water curling up from the Caribbean Sea. Warm ocean water is the fuel of every hurricane, and this current offers a store of energy that runs unusually deep. Most storms churn cooler water up from below, slowly starving themselves of the heat that drives their fierce engine. But over this warm pocket, Camille keeps drawing on heat that never runs out, feeding on a furnace that will not cool. Scientists later describe it as the storm finding perfect conditions, an alignment of ocean and air rarely achieved. The atmosphere above offers no resistance, letting the rising heat vent freely and the storm organize completely. Every element that can strengthen a hurricane falls into place at once, and Camille seizes each advantage without mercy. The result is rapid intensification, a process where a hurricane strengthens with frightening, almost unnatural speed. Few hazards alarm forecasters more, for such explosive growth can turn a manageable threat into a disaster overnight. Camille undergoes exactly this change, swelling from a serious hurricane into a historic one in a matter of mere hours. The storm's eye becomes small and tightly wound, a sign of extraordinary organization and concentrated, ferocious energy. Aircraft crews report flying through air so violent that their readings can barely keep pace with the storm's swift change. Hour by hour, the pressure at the storm's center falls, and falling pressure is the unmistakable signature of growing fury. Reconnaissance aircraft fly into the system, and the numbers they radio back leave seasoned forecasters deeply uneasy. The central pressure plunges toward roughly 900 millibars, among the lowest ever measured in the Atlantic basin. Such a reading describes a storm of almost theoretical intensity, the kind that lives more in calculation than in record. The winds are estimated near 190 miles an hour, with gusts believed to climb well beyond that figure. Yet no instrument truly captures the peak, because the conditions at the core are too extreme for the equipment to endure. The aircraft sensors, meant to read the strongest winds, are pushed past their limits, and the true maximum stays unknown. This is the haunting reality of Camille. The storm grows so powerful that it destroys the very tools sent to measure it. To this very day, the precise peak winds of Camille remain an estimate, a gap at the heart of the historical record. What is certain is that few storms in recorded history have ever approached the raw power now gathering off this coast. As the hurricane bears down on land, the gravest challenge is no longer measurement, but communication to the people. How do you warn a population about a danger that has, quite literally, never been seen or described before this moment? The forecasters know something extraordinary is approaching, but the language and the scales of 1969 cannot contain it. There is no familiar category, no shorthand to convey that this storm dwarfs every hurricane the coast has survived. Officials must persuade skeptical residents to abandon their homes against a danger they cannot fully put into words. As the barometer falls and the surf builds, an uneasy quiet settles over the coast in the hours before the landfall. The night air turns heavy and strange, and those who have weathered storms sense that this one feels deeply different. They issue urgent calls to evacuate the low-lying coast, and along most of the shoreline, families heed the warning. Roads fill with cars moving inland, a quiet exodus of people who choose uncertainty over the rising water behind them. These evacuations, ordered in time, will later be credited with saving countless lives along the Mississippi coast. But not everyone leaves, and the choice to stay is rarely made out of recklessness, whatever later legends may claim. In Pass Christian stands the Richelieu Manor Apartments, a solid 3-story brick building facing the open Gulf. The structure is regarded as one of the sturdiest in the area, even designated as a shelter in times of emergency. 23 people are known to remain inside that night, trusting the strength of brick and the safety of high floors. Many of them are exhausted, having spent the day helping neighbors prepare, boarding windows, and moving belongings upstairs. They are not careless revelers defying the storm, despite the famous tale that history would later wrap around this place. They are ordinary people who make a reasonable-sounding choice, placing their faith in a building everyone calls safe. What none of them can know is that the storm surge approaching the coast will rise higher than anyone has ever recorded. A storm surge is the great dome of seawater that a hurricane pushes ashore, often far deadlier than the wind itself. Camille drives a wall of water more than 7 meters high, a surge that towers over the streets it is about to claim. In the darkness, the sea climbs the coast, swallowing roads, gardens, and the lower floors of buildings, without pause. Along the coast, the wind howls at a pitch no living resident has heard, tearing at all that is not anchored to the earth. Yet it is the water, not the wind, that proves most lethal, rising with a speed that leaves little time to react at all. Power fails across the region, and entire towns face the storm in total darkness, cut off from news and one another. Waves ride atop the surge, battering structures with a force that no ordinary building was ever designed to withstand. Inside the Richelieu, residents retreat upward as the water rises, climbing toward the highest rooms they can reach. For a time, the sturdy walls hold, and faith in the building seems, for a few desperate minutes, almost justified. But the surge keeps coming, relentless, and even the strongest structure on the shore cannot withstand the full sea. The building is overwhelmed and gives way, and of the 23 who shelter there, 8 lose their lives that night. It is a grievous loss, and the truth of it is sorrowful enough without the embellishments later added to the story. For years, a legend will insist that nearly all perished at a reckless party, a tale repeated until it feels like fact. The reality is quieter and sadder. Tired neighbors trusted a safe place, and the sea proved larger than their trust. Honoring them means telling what happened plainly, with dignity, rather than turning their fate into a cautionary myth. Across the coast that same night, the surge writes the same brutal lesson into town after town along the shoreline. When the first gray light of morning arrives, it reveals a landscape that survivors struggle even to recognize. Entire blocks are gone, reduced to bare concrete slabs, where homes had stood only hours before the storm came ashore. The grand beachfront homes, some standing for over a century, are swept away as if they had never been built at all. Massive ships and barges rest far inland, carried by the surge and left stranded like toys among the ruined streets. Ancient oaks that had shaded the coast for generations are stripped bare or torn entirely from the saturated ground. The sea has reached far inland, carrying boats into streets and leaving debris where children once walked to school. Surveyors later traced the surge's path kilometers from the water's edge, mapping how deep the gulf reached that night. The measurements astonish even the experts, confirming a surge higher than any previously documented on this coastline. What the sea reclaimed in a single night had taken human hands many long lifetimes to build along this gentle shore. For days, rescuers searched the wreckage, working through debris fields that stretch for kilometers along the ruined coast. Survivors describe a landscape so altered that they navigate by memory alone, unable to find streets they have known. Aid pours in from across the nation, and the work of feeding, sheltering, and rebuilding begins amid the devastation. The disaster prompts one of the largest relief efforts the region has ever seen, a measure of the storm's vast reach. The coastal communities of Mississippi count their losses, and the toll reaches 143 lives. That number, though heavy, is far lower than it might have been, held down by the evacuations ordered just in time. The contrast is stark and instructive. Where people left, many lived, and where people stayed, the danger found them. Yet the story of Camille does not end at the shoreline, even as the exhausted survivors begin to grasp their loss. The hurricane moves inland, and by every rule of forecasting, a storm this far from the sea should weaken and fade. Cut off from the warm ocean that fed it, Camille does lose its winds, downgraded to a mere remnant within a day or two. Forecasters turn toward recovery, reasonably assuming the worst of this disaster now lies safely behind the nation. But the dying storm still carries an ocean's worth of moisture, an invisible cargo it has not yet released on the land. Its remnants drift northeast, toward the Blue Ridge Mountains of Virginia, a region utterly unprepared for what comes. The ground there is already saturated from earlier rains, the soil heavy with water and unable to absorb much more. Then, in the darkness of an August night, the storm's remnants stall against the mountains and unleash their full load. The dying hurricane meets a front over Virginia, and the collision wrings the moisture from the air in a sudden torrent. What forecasters expected to be ordinary rainfall becomes instead a downpour of historic and catastrophic proportions. This is one of the most extreme rainfall events ever recorded in the eastern United States, and it arrives unseen. In only a few hours, the mountains receive rainfall measured near 80 centimeters, an almost unthinkable amount. The figure strains belief. More rain in a single night than many regions receive across an entire year of seasons. Survivors later say the rain fell so hard they could scarcely breathe, as if the very air itself had turned to water. The saturated mountainsides cannot hold, and entire slopes begin to move, sliding downward in walls of mud and debris. Small mountain streams swell into raging rivers within minutes, overwhelming everything that lies along their banks. In the valleys below, people sleep, unaware that the gentle creeks beside their homes are becoming engines of ruin. There are no warnings here, no sirens, for the danger of inland flooding is poorly understood and poorly communicated. The official forecasts speak of rain, but nothing in them prepares mountain families for a deluge of this magnitude. Through the night, water and earth poured down the hollows of rural Virginia, sweeping away homes, roads, and bridges. Whole families are lost in the darkness, taken by a flood they never saw coming and could not have outrun if they tried. Rescue is nearly impossible, as the same floods that endanger families also cut off every path that might reach them. Some residents climb onto rooftops, while others cling to trees, waiting through the long night for a dawn slow to come. Neighbors who have lived beside one another for decades are separated by torrents that did not exist hours before. In the most isolated hollows, the full extent of the loss will not be known for days, until rescuers can finally arrive. Helicopters become the only link to many cut-off communities, ferrying the injured out and supplies in over broken land. Rescue workers arriving from outside the region are stunned, having never witnessed flooding so sudden and so complete. When dawn breaks over the mountains, the scale of the inland tragedy slowly, painfully reveals itself to the survivors. In Virginia, the storm claims 153 lives, more than perished along the coast it first struck. This is the cruel paradox of Camille. A hurricane remembered for the sea proves deadliest hundreds of miles inland. Nelson County, a quiet rural community in the Blue Ridge, suffers losses so severe they will mark it for generations. Families that had no reason to fear a distant coastal storm are among those who pay the very highest price of all. The inland flood becomes the second hidden disaster of Camille, a catastrophe nested within a catastrophe few imagined. Together, the coast and the mountains turn a single hurricane into one of the deadliest weather events of its age. In the aftermath, scientists begin the difficult work of understanding how one storm could inflict such varied ruin. The questions raised by Camille will reshape meteorology, changing how the world studies and prepares for hurricanes. The first great lesson concerns the ocean and the hidden role of deep, warm currents in feeding a storm's intensity. Researchers come to recognize that the loop current and its warm eddies can supercharge a hurricane beyond expectation. A storm over such water need not weaken on schedule. It can instead explode in strength, as Camille so clearly did. This insight reshapes forecasting, teaching scientists to watch not only where a storm goes, but how strong it may grow. For decades, prediction had focused mostly on track, on the question of where a hurricane's center would come ashore. Camille forces a second question, just as vital, onto the table. How intense will that storm be when it finally arrives? Intensity forecasting is far harder than tracking a path, and the science of it is still being refined to this very day. Camille becomes a case study examined by generations of meteorologists seeking to prevent such surprises in the future. Each storm that rapidly intensifies in the decades that follow is measured in part against the lessons of 1969. The data gathered after Camille feeds new models, sharpening the tools that future forecasters will come to depend upon. Studies of the storm's behavior over the loop current become foundational to how oceanographers view hurricane fuel. In time, satellites, buoys, and computer models will close many of the gaps that left 1969 so dangerously in the dark. Camille's legacy lives in every modern forecast that warns not just of a storm's path, but of how strong it may grow. The disaster also exposes how poorly the public can grasp a storm's danger from technical numbers and pressure tables. Out of that need is born a simple, powerful tool, a scale that translates a hurricane's fury into a single clear number. Developed in the early 1970s, the Saffir-Simpson scale ranks hurricanes from Category 1 to the catastrophic Category 5. It gives officials and families alike a shared language, a way to understand at a glance what a coming storm can do. No longer must a family interpret millibars and wind tables. A single category number now signals the level of danger. It is a quiet revolution in communication, turning complex science into a warning that anyone can understand and heed. The scale is the work of an engineer and a meteorologist, seeking a way to convey danger that the public can truly grasp. Its 5 categories tie each storm to expected damage, from broken branches to the total destruction Camille embodied. Where once a warning meant little to most listeners, a category now carries instant, intuitive weight for everyone. Camille, in hindsight, becomes the very embodiment of the highest category, the benchmark of what a 5 truly means. Yet perhaps the most human lesson of Camille concerns not the ocean or the wind, but the limits of memory itself. Many who stayed behind did so because they had survived earlier storms and trusted that experience to guide them again. We call it the bias of experience, the belief that the worst we have already lived through marks the worst that can come. Camille shatters that belief, proving that nature is not bound by the limits of any single generation's recollection. A storm can always exceed the last one, and preparing only for what we remember leaves us exposed to what we cannot. This lesson, learned at terrible cost in 1969, remains one of the most important and most easily forgotten of them all. Even now, decades later, certain mysteries of Camille endure, resisting the full understanding scientists long to reach. The storm's true peak strength at landfall may never be known, lost when its instruments failed at the violent core. We are left with estimates and reconstructions, a portrait of a monster whose exact dimensions slipped beyond our reach. And so a question lingers in the minds of those who study these storms. Could a hurricane like Camille happen again? The answer, troubling as it is, appears to be yes. And the reasons lie in the changing condition of the oceans themselves. As the seas grow warmer, the conditions that allowed Camille to intensify so rapidly are becoming more common, not less. Rapid intensification, once a rare and shocking event, is now observed with unsettling frequency in storms worldwide. A hurricane that strengthens explosively in its final hours leaves little time for the warnings and escapes that save lives. Modern forecasters hold far better tools than their predecessors, yet a rapidly intensifying storm still tests them all. The hours saved or lost in such a forecast can decide whether thousands have time to reach safety before the landfall. The challenge that defeated forecasters in 1969 has not vanished. In many ways, it has grown sharper with each year. And the inland danger that made Virginia's mountains so deadly remains just as misunderstood, far from any coastline. People hundreds of miles from the sea still underestimate the flooding that a dying hurricane can carry across the land. Coastal populations have grown enormously since 1969, placing far more people and property in the path of future storms. A surge like Camille's, striking a crowded modern shoreline, could threaten numbers of lives difficult to contemplate. This is why the lessons of one August night still shape evacuation plans and building codes across the entire region. Yet no model can force a family to leave, and the choice each household makes remains as decisive now as it was then. The hardest risk to communicate is often the one that seems impossible, the threat that does not match what we expect. Camille's deepest warning is not about wind speeds or pressure, but about the gap between what we imagine and what occurs. When we measure danger only against our own experience, we prepare for the storms of the past, not the ones to come. In the end, the most lasting wound of Camille is not the wreckage it left, but the absence that followed in its wake. Survivors speak less of the violence of the storm than of the silence that came after, the stillness where life had been. Whole communities did not simply suffer along this coast. In places, they were erased, their streets and homes gone. The deepest trauma is not the noise of destruction, but the quiet of a place where so many once lived and now do not. Recovery comes slowly to the coast and the mountains alike, and the rebuilding stretches across many difficult years. But some things are never rebuilt, and the map of these communities carries the storm's mark, long after the waters fall. That silence is the truest measure of what Camille took, a void no statistic can fully hold or honestly describe. Memorials now mark the places where communities once stood, quiet reminders set against the rebuilt and living coast. Each anniversary, survivors and their descendants gather to remember, keeping the story alive for those who follow. The names of the lost are recorded and read aloud, so that the human cost is never reduced to a number on a page. And somewhere in the warm waters of the world, the conditions that made Camille are quietly assembling once again. Hurricane Camille endures as a warning written in water and wind, a lesson the world is still learning how to read. It reminds us that nature holds no regard for what we believe to be impossible, and bows to none of our assumptions. The storms of the past are not the limit of the storms to come, and humility before the natural world is our best defense. To remember Camille is to honor those who were lost, and to carry forward the hard knowledge their loss left behind. For history is full of nights when the world changed beyond recognition, and there is always more to learn from them.